After ending its isolationism and deciding to declare war on Germany and the other Central Powers in April of 1917, the United States would play a pivotal role in turning the tide of World War I. Beginning with the first deployment of the U.S. Navy and U.S. soldiers in June of 1917, and going through the end of the war in November 1918, the actions of the United States would contribute to the Allied victory in two major ways. The first action taken by the United States that helped contribute to an Allied victory was the introduction of the convoy system and the use of the U.S. Navy. Led by Vice Admiral William Sims, the United States Navy was used to create the convoy system. The convoy system helped to escort ships across the Atlantic Ocean and provide them safe passage into Europe, where they would be able to resupply the Allied army as well as the Allied civilians living in France and England. Under the convoy system, merchant ships would be surrounded by a series of U.S. naval ships, creating a safe zone where they could pass directly through the Atlantic Ocean with reduced risk of being sunk by a German U boat. Under the convoy system, the convoy was led by a cruiser, which was accompanied by several destroyers that were on the lookout for German U boats. By surrounding the merchant ships with these military vessels, U boats were forced to stay out of range of the merchant ships and became much less effective as a weapon in World War I. By having a heavy guard of destroyers escorting the ships, carrying food and supplies back and forth across the Atlantic Ocean, the United States was able to significantly reduce the loss of ships and lives compared to earlier years in the war, where Germany was able to successfully operate unrestricted submarine warfare. And this helped to reinforce the British blockade, preventing Germany from getting supplies, while also supplying vital supplies to the Allied nations. This map depicts how the convoy system worked. As you can see, merchant ships would leave the United States and Canada carrying supplies needed for the war effort and for civilians in Europe. The ships would travel across the Atlantic Ocean until they reached the outer edge of the German U-boat patrols, designated by the red line on the map. Once they got to an area where there was significant danger, the convoy of military ships would greet them and follow them through the danger areas into the ports of England, France, and Belgium. This allowed the Allies to bring in the needed supplies that would help them break the stalemate, resupply the beleaguered Allied soldiers fighting on the Western Front, and provide relief to the citizens and civilians who were struggling due to rationing and the restrictions on goods in order to help their country's war efforts. The second way that the United States contributed to the Allied victory was with the introduction of the U.S. Army to the battlefields of the Western Front. American soldiers, known as the American Expeditionary Force, were led by U.S. General John J. Pershing, who had risen to prominence during the early 1900s following his role in the Spanish-American War and the U.S. efforts during the Mexican Revolution. Pershing would lead over 1 million U.S. soldiers, also known as doughboys, Yanks, and Johnnies, into the battlefields of the Western Front. These soldiers played a pivotal role as they were able to reinforce and provide a morale boost to the beleaguered British and French soldiers who had been fighting on the Western Front since 1915. The introduction of over 1 million new, fresh soldiers to the battlefields of the Western Front gave the Allies a significant advantage as the Germans were beginning to focus their efforts on a final push to win World War I. After being deployed to the Western Front, American expeditionary forces would contribute in over a dozen major battles of World War I in the year 1918. However, 3 battles show the true significance and importance of America's efforts. The first was the Second Battle of the Somme, which occurred from March through April of 1918. During this battle, American forces played a pivotal role in supporting the British and French armies who had suffered heavy casualties. As a result of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, signed in November 1917, Russia ended its fighting in World War I, which allowed Germany to redeploy its forces from the Eastern Front to focus on one final offensive on the Western Front. In the Battle of the Somme, Germany hoped to break the stalemate and advance their army into France so that they could take control of the French capital city of Paris before a significant number of American troops arrived. During the attack at the Somme, the British and French suffered over 800,000 total casualties, and American forces provided the reinforcement to slow the German advance. Despite advancing 40 miles into Allied territory on the Western Front and reaching the French river known as the Marne, Germany would suffer heavy losses and lose over 500,000 soldiers to injury and death. 2 months later, the Allies began to push back on the German military in the Second Battle of the Marne, which occurred during the months of July and August of 1918. At the Second Battle of the Marne, a group of Allied troops, including French, British, Belgian, and American soldiers, launched an offensive attack on the German military stationed at the River Marne. The goal of this attack was to drive the Germans back, away from the River Marne, and the Allies successfully stopped the German advance at the area of France known as Chateau Thierry in a battle that was conducted largely with American soldiers. While it was not a decisive victory and did not end the war, it completely stopped the German push and would lead to the final battle of World War I, which would occur during the months of September, October, and November of 1918. In the Battle of Argonne Forest, American soldiers who were considered green or new to the Western Front and unaware of the realities and brutality of trench warfare were led into battle by American General John Blackjack Pershing. This group of soldiers showed significant bravery over the 2.5 months of the battle and ultimately defeated the Germans, forcing them to agree to an armistice ending World War I. The armistice, ending the fighting in World War I, was signed by Germany and the Allies on November 11, 1918. The armistice was signed at 11 a.m. on November 11, 1918, signaling the end of the fighting in World War I. While the war would not officially end until the Treaty of Versailles was signed in 1919, November 11, 1918 has come to signify the end of the war and is recognized today as Veterans Day in the United States. Through the introduction and deployment of American troops into the battlefields of the Western Front and onto the Atlantic Ocean with the use of the United States Navy, America and our forces were able to support the Allies and turn the tide in World War I, bringing about Allied victory and the end of the war.